Hey there everyone, Ramesh here. Welcome to Angular Spring Boot Full Stack Application Development course. This is going to be 3 hours full coding course, guys. In this course, you are going to learn how to build a complete single page web application using Angular and Spring Boot. Okay, in this course I am going to use Angular 10. You can use Angular 8 or 9 or Angular 11 as per your project requirement, but I am going to use Angular 10 in this course. Alright, so whatever Angular version you use, you can use, but make sure that you will update Angular version in a package.json file. Okay, so while creating Angular project, I will show you where you can exactly update the Angular version. Alright guys, so this is going to be a complete series or a course for developing a full stack web application using Angular and Spring Boot. In this tutorial series, we will learn how to develop crude full stack web application, that is basic employee management application using Angular 10 and Spring Boot. Basically, we are going to develop 5 features in this project. So we'll create employee feature, list employee feature, update employee feature, delete employee feature, and view employee feature. So these are the 5 features we are going to develop in our employee management application, and we are going to use Spring Boot to develop RESTful web services and Angular to develop client-side application. So before implementing our employee management application, that is full stack application, let's quickly have a demo what exactly we are going to build in this tutorial series. So this is the user interface of our full stack application, that is employee management application. So this is the employees list page. Here we're gonna add employees, and this is the header of our application. This is the footer, and header you can see here employees list tab, and this is add employee tab. Let's go ahead and let's click on add employee tab, and this is the create employee page, and we're going to use this page to add a new employee to the employees list. Let's go ahead and let's add one of the employee. First name Ramesh, last name Fadtari, and email ID ramesh@gmail.com. Hit submit. Yeah, here we go. An employee is added to the employee list. Let's go ahead and let's add one more employee. Let's say John Cena, and email ID as john@gmail.com. Hit submit. Let's go ahead and let's add one more employee. Let's say admin, and last name admin, and email ID let's say admin@gmail.com. Yeah, here we go. So we have added 3 employees to the employee list. Now let's go ahead and let's see update functionality. I'm going to update Ramesh Fadtare employee. Click on update button, and here I'm going to update first name from Ramesh to Ram, and email ID from Ramesh to ram@gmail.com. Hit submit button. Yeah, here we go. Alright guys, look at here, the employee is successfully updated. Now let's go ahead and let's delete one of the employee. Let's say I'm going to delete John Cena employee. Click on delete button. Yeah, so employee is successfully deleted. Now let's see one more employee. I'm going to delete Ram employee. Yeah, great. So here we have details button. You can click on details button to view a particular employee details in a separate page. And here we have back to employee list button. Click on this button to navigate to the employee list page. So these are the 5 features that we are going to develop in this project: add employee, list employee, and delete, update, and view details employee. So these are the 5 functionalities that we are going to develop in this full stack application. Let's take a quick overview of Angular and Spring Boot. Angular is a platform and framework for building single page client applications using HTML and TypeScript. Angular is written in TypeScript. Okay, and you should have a basic understanding of TypeScript in order to work with Angular. And we are going to use Angular 10, which is the latest release of Angular as of now. Well, Angular is popular especially for developing single page applications. Angular is modular in nature. So Angular application is divided into multiple modules, and each module can have internal components, services, directives, templates, etc. And Angular provides the built-in features like dependency injection and data binding. Alright, so Angular is one of the most popular TypeScript-based framework for building single-page applications. Well, Spring Boot is pretty much popular for developing RESTful web services and microservices. Spring Boot has taken Spring framework to the next level. It has drastically reduced the configuration and setup time required for Spring-based projects. You can set up Spring project with almost zero configuration and start building the things that actually matter to your application. Angular and Spring Boot is a great combination to develop full stack application. What you will learn in this tutorial series, you will learn how to develop crude full stack application with Angular as a front end and Spring Boot as a backend, and you will learn how to build a great RESTful APIs with Spring Boot, and you will learn how to solve the challenges of connecting Angular frontend to REST API, which is developed using Spring Boot. You will learn how to connect REST API to JPA or Hibernate with Spring Boot. So basically we are going to use Spring Data JPA, which in turn uses Hibernate as a JPA provider. So you will learn how to use Spring Data JPA or Hibernate in Spring Boot application. You will learn how to use wide variety of Spring Boot starter projects such as Spring Boot Web Starter dependency, Spring Boot Data JPA dependency, and other dependencies. So we are going to use MySQL database. So you will also learn how to connect Spring Boot application with MySQL database. And you will learn the basics of Angular, like Angular modules, components, data binding, and routing. So while developing this Angular application, I'm going to also explain you about Angular modules, components, data bindings, and routing as well. Now let's take a look at client-server architecture. At the server side, we have Spring Boot application, which creates and exposes REST API, and at the client side we have Angular application, which we use to develop single page application, and it consumes REST APIs, which is exposed by Spring Boot application. Alright, so this is how the client server architecture looks like. Let's take a look at our Angular Spring Boot crude full stack application architecture. Basically we are going to develop two projects, Spring Boot project at the back end and Angular project at the front end. Well, let's first take a look at our Spring Boot application architecture, and then we'll move on to the Angular application architecture. So at a Spring Boot architecture, we have different components like Spring REST controller, Spring Data JPA. So at a persistence layer, we are going to use Spring Data JPA, and Spring Data JPA, it will communicate with a database, that is MySQL. So we are going to use MySQL database in this series. So Spring Data JPA, it internally uses Hibernate as a JPA provider, and it will expose all the database operations for a particular entity. So for example, we are going to create employee JPA entity in our project, and Spring Data JPA provides all the crude operations for employee entity. So we use Spring Data JPA to reduce a lot of boilerplate code that is required to develop a persistence layer. And here Spring REST controller, we develop using Spring MVC to develop and expose REST endpoints, and we are going to develop 5 REST APIs for employee resource. So this is a simple architecture of our Spring Boot project. At a database layer, we are going to use MySQL database, but you are free to use any relational databases like Postgres database, SQL Server, Oracle, etc. because Spring Data JPA internally uses Hibernate. Out of the box, Hibernate supports all the relational databases, so we just need to change the configuration, and underlying code remains same in case of Hibernate. So you are free to use any relational databases. So let's take a look at Angular application architecture. So look at here, we have different components in Angular application. We have view templates, components, services, and we may have directives, pipes, etc. So we use HTML to develop templates, and components basically contains properties and methods, so which will handle the data for templates. and we can perform two-way binding between template and component. So basically we use Angular interpolation to bind properties in templates. Components will basically handle a user interface data. Services are Angular services where we keep all the common logic, and we inject services in required components using Angular dependency injection. And in our application we write all the REST client code in services to make a REST API call. Well, Angular has its own HTTP module, so we can use HTTP module to make a REST API call. Okay, great. So this is the simple architecture of our Angular Spring Boot CRUD full stack application. Now let's quickly take a look at what are the tools and technologies that we'll be using at a front end side. We're going to use Angular 10, which is the latest release of Angular while recording this video, and we are going to use TypeScript to write code in an Angular application, and we are going to use Node.js and npm, and we use Visual Studio Code IDE to develop Angular application, and we are going to use Angular CLI to generate Angular application, its components, services, classes, and lot more things. And we are going to use Bootstrap 4 CSS library to make our Angular application stylish and responsive. Next, let's take a look at the tools and technologies that we'll be using at the server side. We're going to use Spring Boot 2+, and Spring Data JPA internally uses Hibernate, and we're going to use Maven 3.2+, and we use JDK 1.8, and we're going to use Embedded Tomcat 8.5+, and we use MySQL database. Well, these are the tools and technologies that we'll be using at the server side. Now let's take a look at prerequisites for this course. So you should have basic knowledge of HTML and CSS, and you should have basic knowledge of TypeScript. If you know JavaScript already, then probably you will understand TypeScript very easily. And make sure that you have installed Node.js and npm on your machine, and you should know the basic fundamentals of Angular, because I'm not going to cover Angular fundamentals or basics. So make sure that you have enough knowledge of Angular to develop this full stack application, and also you have enough knowledge of Spring Boot to develop our full stack application. Now let's understand the project development process. So we'll basically develop 5 functionalities, and we'll begin with list employee functionality, and then create employee functionality, and then update employee functionality. Next we'll develop delete employee functionality, and finally we develop view employee functionality. So in this order, we'll first begin with list employee functionality, and then create, update, delete, and view. Okay. Let's open Eclipse STS IDE, and let's quickly create a Spring Boot project. In Eclipse STS IDE, go to the file section, new, and then choose Spring Starter project. So look at here, this is a Spring Initializer website URL, and Spring Initializer is integrated in Eclipse STS IDE, and we can use Spring Initializer to quickly create and bootstrap Spring based project. Let's give a name to the project like Spring Boot backend, and keep type as Maven, packaging as a jar, Java version 8, language Java. Let's give group ID as net.javaguides, and artifact ID is same as the name of the project, and keep version and description as it is, and keep package as net.javaguides.springboot, but you can give any package name that you want. Once you are happy with project details, click next, and here we have Spring Boot version that is 2.3.1. so this is the latest release of Spring Boot as of now. Now what we'll do, we'll pick up Spring Boot starter dependencies. Let's go ahead and let's pick up Spring Web starter dependency. We use Spring Web starter dependency to develop RESTful web services, and let's go ahead and let's pick up Spring Data JPA dependency. So we use Spring Data JPA dependency to develop a repository layer, and Spring Data JPA internally uses Hibernate as a JPA provider. we basically use Spring Data JPA to reduce a lot of boilerplate code that is required to develop a DAO layer. Alright, and we are going to use MySQL database. So let's quickly pick up MySQL JDBC driver, and let's also choose Spring Boot DevTools dependency. Spring Boot DevTools dependency. So we use this dependency because whenever we make some changes in a project, we no need to restart the server again and again. Okay. Alright guys, once you select all the required dependencies, hit finish. This will create a Spring Boot project in Eclipse STSID. Yeah, here we go. Once we have created a Spring Boot project, let's go ahead and let's create a database. Open MySQL Workbench and just type SQL statement like create database followed by name of the database. Let's give name of the database as employee management underscore system, something like this, and execute this SQL statement and refresh here, and look at here, the employee management system database is get created. Once we create a database, let's go ahead and let's configure MySQL JDBC URL, username, password in Spring Boot project. Go to the resource folder. Within the resource folder, open application.properties file, and here just type spring.datasource.url. okay, let's give JDBC URL to connect to the MySQL database. So look at here, we have employee management system database that just we have created in MySQL Workbench. Similarly, let's go ahead and let's configure username and password. Let's type the property spring.datasource.username. It's root, and let's also configure password. It's again root. Okay, so make sure that you will change JDBC URL, username, password as per your MySQL database installation on your machine. Now let's go ahead and let's configure Hibernate properties. We are using MySQL database, so we have to configure Hibernate dialect for MySQL database. So look at here, this is a property and this is the value. So we are using MySQL 5 dialect. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's configure one more Hibernate property. So look at here, so this is a Hibernate detail auto property. So we use this property to automatically create the tables in a database. So Hibernate will automatically create tables in a database. We no need to manually create the tables. Alright guys, once we configure JDBC credentials and Hibernate properties, let's go ahead and let's create a packaging structure. Right click on root package, new, and then choose package, and let's give package name as model. Let's create one more package. Right click on root package, new, and then choose package, and let's give package name as controller. Again, let's go ahead and let's create one more package. Let's name it as a repository. Alright, so let's go ahead and create one more package, and let's name it as exception. Alright, let's go ahead and let's create a JPA entity. Right click on model package, new, and then choose class. Let's give an entity name as employee. Alright, let's quickly define the instance variables. Private long id, private string first name, private string last name, and private string email ID. Alright, let's quickly create getter setter methods to access these private fields. And also create a parameterized constructor. Right click, source, generate constructor using fields, deselect ID and hit generate. And let's also create a default constructor. So remember, whenever you create a parameterized constructor, you have to create a default constructor, because Hibernate internally uses proxies to create proxy objects. Alright, once we have created employee class, now let's go ahead and let's use JP annotations to map this model to the relational database table. Let's go ahead and let's use @entity annotation, and let's also use @table annotation to provide a table name. Let's give table name as employees. Alright, let's define a primary key for our table. Let's use @id annotation, and also let's use a primary key generation strategy. For that, let's use @generatorValue annotation, and it has a property called strategy, and let's use generation type as identity, and let's use @column annotation to provide a column name to the field. Here basically we map a column name to the field, and we can also give a column name over here. Let's use a name attribute to provide a column name. Let's say first underscore name, and let's copy this, and let's similarly give a column name to the last name, last underscore name, and also give column name to the email ID, email underscore ID. That's it, guys. That is pretty much we have created employee JP entity. Now what we'll do, we'll create a repository interface. Right click on repository package, new, and then choose interface. Here let's give a repository name as employee repository. Great. Now what we'll do, we'll extend this interface from JPA repository. So JPA repository basically exposes database code methods like save, find by ID, find all, delete by ID, delete. Okay, it exposes a lot of methods, and it provides out of the box implementation for all the database methods. So we don't need to write any boilerplate code that is required to develop the DAO layer. Let's pass employee JP entity, and here the type of the primary key. Let's annotate this interface with @repository annotation. Alright, so look at here, JP repository provides a lot of methods like find all, and also it provides a sorting support. Okay, and also provides pagination. So look at here, it internally extends paging and sorting repository. Paging and sorting repository interface provides support for sorting and pagination, and paging and sorting repository extends CRUD repository. So CRUD repository interface exposes all the CRUD methods for entity. Okay, for example, save all, find by ID, exist by ID. Okay, so JPA repository internally extends all these interfaces, so we can leverage all these methods. We no need to create methods over here. Okay, great. Now it's time to create a RESTful web services. So before that, let's go ahead and let's create one custom exception class. Right click on exception package, new, and then choose class, and let's name this custom exception class as a resource not found exception. So whenever a resource not exist in a database, then we can throw this exception. Okay, from the API layer, REST API basically throws this exception that we will see a bit later. This exception extends a runtime exception. Okay, and a runtime exception internally implements serializable interface. So let's go ahead and let's quickly add the serial version ID here. Let's say public, and here let's pass string message, and we simply pass this message to the super class. Okay, it's pretty simple custom exception. Now let's annotate this exception class with @response status annotation. Use value property and let us say HTTP status not found. Okay, so basically we use this custom exception. So whenever a record not exists in database, then REST API will throw this exception, and we have annotated this exception with @response status annotation. So API will return a not found status to the client. Okay, that's great. Now let's go ahead and let's create Spring MVC controller. Right click on controller package, new, and then choose class, and let's call controller class as employee controller. Okay, within a controller we create a REST APIs. So let's add @REST controller annotation, and also add @request mapping annotation, and let's define a standard URL over here /API/version v1. So this is the standard we use typically whenever we develop a REST APIs like v1, like version 1. So we are releasing all the REST APIs as release 1, and this is the API. So this is a standard URL endpoint that typically we use in our REST APIs. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's inject employee repository over here, employee repository, and let's add @void annotation to inject this repository by Spring container. Now we'll develop get all employees REST API. Just type public and then list. So this REST API should return a list of employees to the client. So let's give return type as list of employees. Let's give a method name as get all employees. Alright, and just return employee repository dot find all method. So look at here, find all method returns a list of employees. Okay, let's select this and let's add @get mapping annotation, and let's specify a URL here /employees. Okay, so once we hit a URL in a browser like localhost 8080 API/v1/employees, then this REST API will get called, and this API returns a list of employees to the client. Alright, let's go ahead and let's run the Spring Boot project and let us test this REST API. Open our Spring Boot main class, right click and run as Spring Boot app. Alright guys, our Spring Boot application is up and running on embedded Tomcat server on port 8080, and look at here, we haven't created create employee REST API in order to create records in a database. We have directly created get all employees. So what we'll do, we'll insert some records in an employees table in a database, and we call this REST API, and will retrieve, this API will retrieve all the employees from the table and it will return to the client. Okay, let's go back to the MySQL workbench and let's insert few records. Now if we refresh the schemas and if you look at here, employees management system database, a employees table is created. Okay, so this table is automatically created by Hibernate. And now right click and select rows. So if you look at the table, there are no records in a table. So let's quickly insert few records. One email ID ramesh@gmail.com, first name Ramesh, last name Fadtari, and also insert one more record, Tony@gmail.com, first name Tony, last name Stark. Let's keep these two records and hit apply and finish. Alright, let's execute this select statement again in order to make sure that the records are there in a table. Yeah, we have two records in a table. Now let's go back to the browser and let's hit a REST API in a browser tab, and we'll be able to get a response as a JSON array of employees objects. Okay, great. Alright guys, open the browser, go to the new tab and just type localhost 8080/API/v1/employees and hit enter. Yeah, here we go. We got a JSON array as a response from the REST API. We can use Postman REST client to test our get all employees REST API. So open a Postman client and in a enter request URL just type localhost 8080/API/v1/employees and select HTTP GET method. Alright, and hit send button, and here you can see we got a JSON response. We got an array of employee objects. Hey guys, it's time to create Angular application. So before creating Angular application, make sure that you have installed Node.js and npm on your machine. So in order to install Node.js, what you can do is you can just type Node.js in browser, hit finish, and head over to the Node.js official website. So it will navigate to the official website of Node.js on download page. So this is the download page of Node.js official website. From here you can download a latest release of Node.js. Go ahead and download a latest release of Node.js and install on your machine. So when you install Node.js, it will automatically install npm, so you no need to manually install npm again. Well, let's check the version of Node.js and npm that we have installed in our machine. So for that, let's go ahead and let's open a command prompt. So I'm using Windows, so I can use a command prompt here, but if you are using Linux or Ubuntu, you can just use a terminal to check a version of Node.js. Just type the command node-v, so this will tell you the version of Node.js that you are using. And in order to check the version of npm, just type the command npm-v, so this will give you the version of npm that you have installed in your machine. Alright guys, once we have installed Node.js and npm, let's go ahead and let's install Angular CLI. If you are unaware with Angular CLI, so Angular CLI is a command line interface tool which we can use to create Angular applications. So it's pretty awesome tool that follows best practices to create application structure, file structure, naming conventions for components, component templates, services, directives, a lot of things. Alright guys, we are going to use Angular CLI to create and set up Angular application, and we also use Angular CLI to create a components services, classes, and a lot of things. Let's head over to the browser and let's search for Angular CLI. Open new tab in a browser and just search for Angular CLI and head over to the Angular CLI official website and look at here. These are the commands you can use to install Angular CLI, to create Angular project and run the Angular project. So these are the couple of commands you can use to quickly install Angular CLI and create Angular project and run Angular project. Okay, so if you want to know more about these commands, you can read the description over here. Alright, let's go ahead and let's use this command to install Angular CLI. You can just copy this command and head over to the command prompt, paste it here. So this command will install Angular CLI globally. Well, I have already installed Angular CLI in my machine. So what I will do is I will just check the version of Angular CLI. Just enter the command ng -version. So once you install Angular CLI in our machine, you can use this command to check the version of Angular CLI that you have installed in your machine. Alright guys, so look at here. Once the command completes, you can able to see Angular CLI 10.0.7 here. This is the version of Angular CLI that I am right now using, and you can able to also see the Node.js version here. Alright guys, once we have installed Node.js, npm and Angular CLI, we're gonna need VS Code IDE to develop Angular application. For that, just search for VS Code download in a browser and hit finish and head over to the download page of VS Code official website. And this is the download page. So from here we can download VS Code IDE installer. If you are using Windows, then check out this button, and if you are using Mac, then check out this button. So just click on this button, you will be able to download VS Code installer. Once you have installed VS Code IDE in your machine, then we are good to create Angular application and we are good to develop Angular application. Alright, great. So go to the file system and create a folder something like Angular Spring Boot Crude Full Stack App, and open this folder in a command prompt. Alright, and just type the command code and dot. So this will open a VS Code IDE inside this folder. Hit enter. I hope you guys are following the steps. Yeah, great. Now within this folder we are going to create our Angular application. Well, we are going to use integrated terminal of VS Code. So in order to get an integrated terminal, go to the terminal tab here, click on new terminal, and at the bottom you can able to see here a terminal is opened. Well, in order to create Angular application, we are going to use command that is new followed by name of the project. So this is the command which we can use to create Angular app. Once we create Angular app, we can use the command ng-serve to run Angular app. Well, go to the integrated terminal and just type the command ng new followed by name of the project. So I'm going to give name of the project as Angular frontend. You can give any project name that you are happy with, but I am going to give a project name as Angular frontend. Alright, hit enter. So this will ask you few options. Would you like to add Angular routing? Yes. Which style sheet format would you like to use? So I'm going to use default, that is CSS. So don't choose any option, just hit enter. And this command take couple of minutes to install packages. It will basically create node_modules package and it will install all the packages and necessary stuff. Once the command completes, it says packages installed successfully, and you can able to see Angular-frontend folder is created And if you expand this folder, you can able to see a whole lot of files and folders are created inside this Angular-frontend folder. So this is our Angular application, and this is the folder structure that is created by Angular CLI. So before knowing few of the important files and folders, let's go ahead and let's first run our Angular application. Go to the integrated terminal and just type the command cd and then navigate inside the folder that is Angular-frontend. Hit enter. So before running Angular application using ngserve command, make sure that you are inside a folder, okay, and just type the command ng serve, hit finish. So this will basically run Angular application in local development server on port 4200. Once ngserve command completes, it says compiled successfully. Alright, and Angular live development server is listening on localhost 4200. Let's go ahead and let's open the browser and hit this URL in a browser to access our Angular application. Go to the browser and in a new tab just type a localhost 4200. Yeah, here it is. So this is the default template provided by Angular. So this template or HTML page contains few links which will in turn navigate to the Angular official website documentation, Angular CLI documentation, and Angular blog site. Alright. Alright guys, our Angular application is up and running on port 4200. Let's go ahead and let's explore important folders and files in our Angular app generated by Angular CLI. Let's begin with package.json file. So package.json file contains the name of the project, version of the project, and a few scripts to run Angular application, to build Angular application, and to test Angular application. And this is the dependency section. Inside the dependency section, we define all the dependencies and its version required to run our Angular application. So notice here we are using Angular 10, which is latest release of Angular, and look at here we are using dev dependencies. So basically package.json file contains all the tools, libraries, and packages which are required to run our Angular application. And package.json file which looks like pom.xml in Maven project. So whenever we use the command npm install, it will install all the dependencies and its version in node_modules folder. Likewise in Maven project, so pom.xml contains all the dependencies and plugins, right? So whenever we run the command like maven install clean install, then basically Maven will download all the dependencies from the internet and it will store in a local repository. So similarly, when we run the command npm install, so Node.js will basically download and install all these dependencies in node_modules folder. Alright, so this is all about package.json, and we have tsconfig.json file. So this file related to TypeScript configuration, and it internally called tsconfig.app.json and tsconfig.spec.json. Well, so we write a TypeScript code in Angular application, right? And browser don't understand the TypeScript. So these are the few TypeScript configuration files that will convert a TypeScript code into JavaScript so that browser can able to compile and run the Angular application. So next is node_modules folder. So this folder contains all the dependencies, packages that are required to run Angular application, and this folder will basically generate when we create our Angular app using Angular CLI. And whenever we use npm command to install any JavaScript libraries or packages, so these library and packages will get stored in this local folder, that is node_modules folder. Next is src folder. So all your development goes inside src folder. Within src folder, you can find main.ts file. So this is a very important file, and this is the entry point of our Angular application. Next is index.html file. So this is the single file which will get served in a browser, and we are developing single page application, so we should have only one HTML file, and it in turn update the same HTML file. So look at here, app root. So this is the selector which we have configured in app component, and this selector in turn get called app component HTML template. Okay, great. Next is app module. So app module is a root module of our application, and inside this module we configure components in declarations array and other modules, dependent modules inside imports array, and we configure providers like services. And within the app module we bootstrap and kickstart app component, and app component is our root component. Well, Angular application can have any number of modules, but it should have at least one module, and that is called app module or root module. Okay, and Angular application can have any number of components, but it should have at least one component, that is called a root component or app component. Understood? And next is polyfills. So this is related to browser specific to support different browsers, so this file will take care. And styles.css, so here we basically globally configure CSS files. And this is a test.ts file which is related to test cases in Angular application, and this is the environments folder. So all the environments configurations goes inside this folder. And assets folder contains static files like images, JavaScript files, CSS files, etc. And this is the app routing modules. We basically configure a routing of our Angular application. So this is pretty much about the files and the important files in our Angular application. Now let's see how the control flows in our Angular application. So look at here, main.ts file. So this is the entry point of our Angular application, and the control first comes to the main.ts file in turn bootstrap and kickstart app module using bootstrap module method, and app module in turn bootstrap and kickstart app component. App component is our root component, and app component has a property called title, and this title will be rendered inside app component HTML template. So this is how the control flows in Angular application. Let's go ahead and let's understand what are the components that we are going to develop going forward in our Angular application. Well, we are going to create 4 components, and each component represents a functionality. For example, create employee component we develop to perform create employee functionality. We create employee list component to perform employee list functionality. We create update employee component to perform update employee functionality, and we create employee details component to perform view employee details functionality. So each component represents a separate functionality. Okay, great. Now we have employee service. So employee service is basically a Angular service which holds all the HTTP REST client code, and basically we use Angular service to keep all the common logic, and we can inject employee service in required components. So basically we use Angular dependency injection to inject Angular services in various components, and we can delegate a task to the employee service. For example, we can keep all the logging common logic in employee service, and we can inject in required components, and we can call logging methods. So in our Angular application we create employee service class which will communicate with server using REST APIs, and so employee service internally uses HTTP client module to make a REST API call. So basically we are going to make a get a REST API call, and post REST API call, and put REST API call, and delete REST API call. So these are the CRUD operations, right? So we are going to write a REST client code in an employee service to make this REST API call. Okay, great. And look at here, we have a router. So we are going to configure routing in app routing module. Angular provides its own routing module, so we can use Angular provided modules to configure routing in our Angular application. Alright, great. And also we are going to create a employee model. So this is basically a TypeScript class. It contains properties, and we create this employee TypeScript class model to hold a response of the REST APIs. So going forward, we'll create all these components, service, and we configure routing in our Angular application. So basically we'll begin with employee list component, but before that we are going to integrate Bootstrap 4 CSS library in our Angular application. In next video, we'll integrate Bootstrap 4 CSS library in our Angular application so that we can make our Angular application responsive and stylish. So once we integrate Bootstrap CSS library in our Angular application, next we'll start creating employee list component. And then once we complete employee list component, then we'll start creating a create employee component. And once we complete create employee component end to end, then we'll start update employee component. So once we complete update employee component, then we'll create employee details component to perform view employee details functionality. Alright guys, this is the quick summary of our Angular application that we are going to develop on going forward. Let's go ahead and let's add Bootstrap CSS library in our Angular application. Bootstrap is a CSS framework which we can use to develop a responsive layouts in our web applications. So there are various ways to integrate Bootstrap in our Angular application. We'll see a few of the simple ways. So first we'll see how to install Bootstrap using npm command, and we'll add a path to our Angular application. For example, open new integrated terminal in VS Code. Go to the terminal, click on new terminal, and make sure that you are in a root folder of your project. And here you need to just type the command npm install bootstrap -- save and hit enter. So this will install a Bootstrap CSS packages inside a node_modules folder, and it will add a new entry in package.json file with its version. For example, if you open package.json file, here you can see a Bootstrap package is added. Once Bootstrap CSS package is successfully installed, go to the angular.json file, and here you can find styles array. So here you can configure a Bootstrap CSS library like this. So this is the path to the Bootstrap CSS library that just we have installed. So this is the first way, and the second way is go to the styles.css file, and here we can just import the path of the Bootstrap CSS library that just we have installed. So this is pretty simple, and I prefer using this way. I globally define the CSS file path over here inside styles.css file. And another way is you can download a Bootstrap CSS remote links from CDN. For example, go to the browser, and in a new tab just search for Bootstrap 4 CDN link, and go to the official website of Bootstrap, and here you can find the CDN remote links of Bootstrap CSS library. Go ahead and click on copy button. So this will copy this URL. So comment out this code and go to the index.html file and go to the header section. Within a header section, just paste the link. Okay, so this is the another way. So these are the three ways I have found integrating Bootstrap CSS library in Angular application. So you can use either one to integrate Bootstrap in Angular application. So to keep it simple, I am going to use the CDN remote links like this, or you can also use this way. So this is the standard way that I prefer. So let me delete this and let me use this way. So you can go to the styles.css and you can configure this path like this. And in order to make sure that whether the Bootstrap is successfully integrated in our Angular application, what I will do is I will open app component template, and I will just remove all the code, and I will add some CSS to h1 HTML element like this. Let me use double curly braces, though this is called interpolation in Angular. So we can use interpolation to access the properties of component. And title is defined in app component, so I'm going to just display title in a web page. And let's use text center Bootstrap CSS class in order to display this title at the center of the page. Let's go ahead and let's use class property, and here I'm going to say text hyphen center. Let's save the file and let's go back to the browser, and let's refresh, and you can able to see here Angular frontend. So this is the name of the project, that is the title that is printed on a middle of the page. It means that a Bootstrap CSS library is successfully integrated in Angular application. If you comment out this code, alright, and save the file and look at here. So without a Bootstrap CSS library, how the title aligned here. Okay, you got the difference, right? So look at here, after adding Bootstrap CSS library, the title is aligned at the center of the page. Alright guys, we have successfully integrated Bootstrap CSS library in our Angular application. Going forward, we are going to use a lot of Bootstrap CSS classes to make our web pages responsive and pretty. We are going to create employee list component which will display a list of employees on a web page. Alright, before that, let's recap what we have done so far. We have created Spring Boot project, we have created JPA entity and JPA repository, we have created and exposed list employee REST API, we have created Angular application, and we had a quick overview of Angular application. And in previous video, we have added Bootstrap 4 in our Angular application. In this video, we will create TypeScript class for employee. So we create an employee TypeScript class which will hold a response of list employee REST API. And we also create Angular list component, Angular list employee component to display a list of employees on a web page. In next video, we will connect our Angular application with list employee REST API, and we will get a list of employees from list employee REST API, and we populate a list of employees on a web page. Alright guys, let's go ahead and let's create TypeScript class for employee, and we will also create Angular list employee component. Let's switch to the VS Code ID and let's create TypeScript class using Angular CLI. Make sure that you are in a project that is a root folder of project Angular-frontend, and let's go ahead and let's use Angular CLI to create TypeScript class. Let's use the command ng g for generate, and then class, and name of the class, let's say employee. So this command will create a TypeScript class. Hit enter. So this command created two files, employee.ts and employee.spec.ts. Well, expand app folder. Within app folder, you can see these two files are created. Alright, So let's go ahead and let's define some properties in our employee TypeScript class. So basically we are creating employee TypeScript class which will basically hold a response of REST API. Okay, let's go ahead and let's define some of the properties. ID, so the type of the ID is number. So in TypeScript we have number as a type, and then define first name property, and this should be string. Last name, this should be string, and then email ID, and again this should be string. It's pretty simple, and these properties should match the JPA employee entity that we have created in our Spring Boot project. Alright, great. Now let's go ahead and let's create employee list component. We are going to use Angular CLI to generate employee list component. Go to the integrated terminal and make sure that you are in a root folder of your project, and just type the command ng and then G for generate, C for component, and let's type name of the component. Let's say employee-list. Hit enter. So notice here this command created 4 files and also updated one of the file, that is app.module.ts file. Well, if you go to the apps folder, expand app folder and expand employee-list folder. So this command created employee list folder, as in within a folder it has created 4 files, and it also updated app.module.ts file. Okay, so Angular CLI will take care to update newly created component in app module. So we no need to explicitly add a newly created component in declaration section of app module. Okay, so look at here, we just created employee list component, right? And Angular CLI will automatically added employee list component to the declarations array, and this component belong to this module. So as I mentioned earlier, each module have multiple components, and we can have as many as modules in our Angular application. Well, so look at here, inside the employee list folder we have 4 files. This is the employee list component.css file. This is a component private CSS file which will applicable to employee list component template. This is the employee list component template. It has some default text which is provided by Angular CLI, and this is the employee list component which will basically handle the data and it will process the data, and this is the employee list component test class. So this is related to test cases, and we are not going to focus on test cases in this series. So let's go ahead and let's open employee list component.ts file. So it has an employee list component. Basically this is a TypeScript class which is annotated with @component decorator. So look at here, basically @component decorator that marks this TypeScript class as an Angular component and provides the configuration metadata that determines how the component should be processed, instantiated, and used at a runtime. Alright, and at the component decorator has 3 attributes: selector, template URL, and style URLs. So we use selector as a custom HTML element, and this selector will be replaced with this employee list component template at a runtime. And this employee list component.css file, this is a component CSS private file which will only applicable to employee list component.html file. Now what we'll do, let's go ahead and let's copy this selector and let's open app component template, and here we're going to use a selector as custom HTML element like this. And if you save the file and if you go back to the browser, we will be able to see a employee list works text printed on a web page. Okay, so look at here, employee list component template has employee list works paragraph. So this is the paragraph printed on a web page. Now we can add a HTML code to display a list of employees on a web page. So let's go ahead and let's create a HTML template which will display a list of employees on a web page. Let's replace this default content and let's go ahead and let's add a HTML code here. I'm going to create h2 HTML element and let's say employee list. So this is the header of our page, and then I'm going to create a table and let's add a Bootstrap CSS classes to the table and then table snippet, table header. Inside a table header, let's go ahead and let's create a table a row here, and inside a row we are going to create column. Let's say first name, employee first name, and this is employee last name, and similarly let's create one more column and this is gonna employee email ID. Okay, pretty simple. And let's create a table body. Inside a table body, let's use a table row here, and then inside a table row we're gonna use ng for inbuilt Angular directive to iterate over a list of employees. So look at here, this is the important step. Let's use *ng for, so this is the inbuilt Angular directive which we can use to iterate over an array of elements or a list of elements. So ng for, which works similar to for loops which we use in programming languages like in Java, C, C++, etc. But the difference is ng for directive we use to iterate over HTML elements. So in this case we are going to iterate over a table row. If we have 10 elements in an array, then ng for directive will create a 10 HTML elements. Alright, that we will see once we write this code. Okay, and here within a double quote, let's create a variable, JavaScript variable, let, and then employee of employees. Okay, so employees, basically this is an array which we need to define in a component. So go to the employee list component, and here we are going to define a property called employees, and this is the type of employee array. And make sure that you import employee TypeScript class at the top, import, and then employee from the employee. Okay, great. So once we define employees property in an employee list component, and this property we can access in employee list component template using ng directive like this. Now we are iterating over a employees array. Now let's go ahead and let's use a td HTML element here, and then use double curly braces. So this is called interpolation in Angular. So we can use interpolation to access properties from an object. In our case we have employee, and then let's go ahead and let's call a property of the employee object like first name. So look at here the array type. So the array type we have employee, right? So this employee class has properties ID, first name, last name, and email ID. So we are using these properties to access a employee first name, last name, email ID. Alright, so here, so just we have called first name. Similarly, let's go ahead and let's use a last name, employee last name property, and let's call email ID. Okay, great. Let's save the files and let's go back to the browser. Yeah, here we go. The HTML table is looking good, and the Bootstrap CSS classes are also successfully added to the HTML table. Now what we will do, we will add some dummy data to the table, and in next video we'll make a REST API call and we will populate a REST API response data in a table. Let's open employee list component, and inside init method we are going to add few records to the employees array. So look at here, this is employees array, and we have added two objects, employee objects, to the employee array. Well, let's save the file and let's go back to the browser, and look at here, we can able to see two employees are displayed in HTML table. Well, let's go ahead and let's add some Bootstrap CSS class like container to the div so that we can align this table in a proper format. Let's open app component template, and here let's go ahead and let's create a div, and let's add a Bootstrap CSS class that is a container, and let's enclose this app employee list element inside a div, and let's save the file and let's see how the table looks in the browser. So look at here, now our HTML table looks good, right? Alright guys, in next video we will make a REST API call and we will populate a real data on a table. In previous video we have created employee list component which will display a list of employees on a web page like this, and we have created some dummy data and we have populated a dummy data on a web page. In this video we are going to create an Angular service which will make in turn a REST API call, and we will populate a REST API response data on a web page. Alright, so before implementing Angular service in our Angular application, let's quickly have an overview of Angular service. We use Angular service to share the data among various components in Angular application. Sometimes we want to write a similar piece of code in various components. So instead of repeating same code in various components in Angular application, we can keep a common code in an Angular service, and we can inject that Angular service in required components so that we can reuse the same code. So to achieve this we can use Angular service, and Angular provides a dependency injection feature. So dependency injection feature make the testing and debugging very simple. A component can delegate certain tasks to the services such as fetching data from the server, validating user input, or logging directly to the console. So validating user input and logging, so these are the common code which required to reuse in different components. So this common code we can write in Angular service, and we can inject that service in various components to call these services. And inside Angular service we can write a REST client code which in turn make a REST API call, and we can inject Angular service in an Angular component so that Angular component can delegate this task like fetching data from the server to the service. Now service is responsible to fetch the data from the server. Well, to define a class as a service in Angular, we use add_injectable decorator to provide the metadata that allows Angular to inject into a component as a dependency. Alright, so we'll see more about add_injectable decorator once we create Angular service in our Angular application. So look at here, in this video we are going to create an Angular service which in turn use HTTP client module to make a REST API call, and we inject employee service in different components, and different components will call methods of employee service. Alright guys, let's go ahead and let's create employee service in our Angular application. So switch to the integrated terminal and make sure that you are in a root folder of your application, and let's use Angular CLI to generate Angular service. Just type the command ng and G for generate, S for service, followed by name of the service. Let's give a service as employee. Hit enter. So this command created two files. Alright, if you expand app folder, within a app folder you can see employee.service.ts and employee.service.spec.ts. So these are the two files created by this command, Angular CLI command. Go ahead and click on employee.service.ts and look at here, this is the employee service. So basically this is a TypeScript class which is annotated with add_injectable decorator. So this add_injectable decorator marks this TypeScript class as as a provider, and it can be injected into various components. Alright, and this service is provided at a root level. Now let's go ahead and let's use HTTP client module to make a REST API call. So before that, make sure that your Spring Boot application is up and running and you are able to access REST endpoints. Let's go ahead and let's access one of the REST API. In a browser, just type localhost 8080/API/v1/employees. So this will gives you an array of employees as a response. Well, our application is up and running and we can able to access the employee list REST API. Now let's go ahead and let's use HTTP client module to call this REST endpoint. So just follow the steps. So first step is go to the app module, and app module depends on HTTP client module. In order to use HTTP client, here just type HTTP client module. Alright, and make sure that HTTP client module is imported at the top. Just type the statement import within a curly braces HTTP client module from @angular/common/http. Alright, so HTTP client module is present in package angular/common/http. Alright, so this is the first step. So make sure that we import HTTP client module in imports array of app module. Now second step is go ahead and inject HTTP client in employee service. So go back to the employee service again, and here in the constructor we are going to inject HTTP client module, private, and then HTTP client, and this is HTTP client, and make sure that we import HTTP client from the Angular package. And let's go ahead and let's import HTTP client at the top. HTTP client from, it should be from Angular package, angular/common/http. Great. Now we have imported HTTP client module and we have injected in employee service using constructor. Now let's go ahead and let's define the property here, private, and let's say base URL, and we are going to define a base URL for our REST endpoints. Go to the browser and just copy this URL. So this is going to be a base URL of all the CRUD REST APIs. Copy and paste here and save the file. Let's go ahead and let's create a method. Let's say get employees list followed by colon and just call observable. So make sure that observable imported from RxJS library at the top, and then we need to provide a type here. Type is array of employees, because this REST endpoint API returns array of employee objects. So for that we need to pass employee array like this. Now let's go ahead and let's return this dot HTTP client and then call get. So we are going to make a get request, right? For that we are going to call get method, and we are going to pass a parameter to the get method, that is base URL. So look at here, we need to use a backstick here, not a single quote. Okay, and then dollar within the curly braces this dot base URL. Okay, and here the return type is employee array, right? So let's just pass this array of employee to the get method like this. Yeah, here we go. So this looks good, right? So this is an observable, and we are going to subscribe for this observable object in component. If you look at the documentation of get method, so get method basically, it constructs a get request that interprets the body as a JSON object and returns the response body in the given type. And if you look at the return type of the get method, it returns observable of the HTTP response. Okay, it returns basically observable object. Now let's go back to the component, employee list component, and let's go ahead and let's inject employee service in employee list component. Go to the constructor and here type private and then employee service, and make sure that we import employee service at the top. Import within the curly braces employee service from employee service. Okay, so once we inject employee service in employee component, we can call employee service methods. So in previous video we have created some dummy data right here inside ng on init method. So let's go ahead and let's delete this data, and let's create a method here, this dot get employees. Okay, and just define this method here. Let's say private get employees, and here we are going to call employee service and then get employee list method. So this method returns observable object, right? So we can go ahead and we can subscribe to this method. So basically it does asynchronous call, and this subscribe will call once it get the data. And to the subscribe method we are going to handle the response of the REST API, and data followed by arrow syntax, and here we're going to assign a response to the employees property. It's pretty simple, right? So this is the response data, and we assign this response data to the employees property. So this employees property is array of employee objects. Alright guys, let's save the file and let's go back to the browser and let's see whether we get a successful response from the server or not. Here if you refresh, you can see here admin employee is successfully populated on the employee list page. So this is the REST API that we have invoked from the Angular service, and same response we have printed on in a table. Now open MySQL workbench and let's add a few more records to the table so that we'll see a few more records in a web page. Let's say ID 30 and first name Ramesh. So this is the email ID, right? Ramesh@gmail.com. First name Ramesh, last name Fartare, and ID 31, email ID sina@gmail.com. First name John, last name Sina, and apply and finish. Okay, let's go back to the browser and let's go ahead and let's refresh, and here we go. So Ramesh and John, so these are the two employees we have just inserted in database, and it's the same employees record we have successfully got from the REST API and we have populated on a web page. Alright guys, we have successfully created a list employee feature Hey guys, we have completed end-to-end list employee functionality. In this video, we are going to configure routing and navigation in our Angular application. Well, going forward, we will be creating a lot of components in our Angular application, and hence in this video, let's go ahead and let's configure routing and navigation in our Angular application. All right. So configuring routing and navigation is pretty simple in Angular project. You just follow the steps I'm going to implement in this video. Well, when we create an Angular application using Angular CLI command like ng new followed by name of the project, so this command will ask a question for us like, would you like to add Angular routing? So if we have a requirement to configure routing in our Angular app, then we say yes, otherwise we say no, right? Let's say we want to configure routing in our Angular application and we say yes, then Angular CLI will automatically configure routing for us, and we need to only configure routes that are required to navigate to specific URL path to specific component. So that we'll see a bit later. If you don't specify Angular routing option here, if you say no for this question, then you need to manually configure routing step by step. And let's go ahead and let's understand what are the required steps required to configure routing in Angular application. First step is open index.html, and here inside header tag you can find a base tag. Base href equals to /. So this base tag is required so that the application knows how to construct the URLs while navigation. So this is the first step. And second step is you need to create app-routing.module.ts. So we have already configured routing using Angular CLI. So Angular CLI already created all the necessary steps that are required to configure routing in Angular application. But if you don't configure routing while application creation using Angular CLI command like ng new, then you need to manually configure routing like this. So first step is you need to provide a base tag in index.html like this, and second step is you need to create app-routing.module.ts file like this, and we create an app routing module, and it is annotated with @ng-module decorator, and here we specify a router module from Angular/router package, and router module has a method for routes, and for route method takes routes as an array. And so look at here, we have defined a constant routes array, and inside array we configure routes, and each route we configure as an object. Alright, and this routes is type of routes module which is from Angular/router package. Alright, so this is the second step. And the third step is go to the app module.ts file, and here you can see app routing module. So you need to import app routing module, and you need to provide app routing module inside imports array, so that our application needs to know we have configured routing in our Angular application. Alright, so this is the third step. And fourth step is we need to configure routing in our app routing module. So here inside routes array we need to define a routes. Alright, inside a routes array let's create a JavaScript object, and so a route definition is a JavaScript object. Here I will define a path. So path in our case is employees, and then component is employee list component. Alright, so look at here, this route is a definition of JavaScript object. Okay, and each route typically has two properties. First property is path, so it's a string and it specifies the URL path for the route. And second property is component, it specifies what component your application needs to display for this particular path. It's pretty simple, right? Now let's go ahead and let's configure one more route. So we need to configure route to redirect URL from empty path to /employees. So let's go ahead and let's configure a route to redirect from empty path to employees. Okay, let me show you how to do it. Let's create a JavaScript object inside an array, and this is path, and path is empty, and then we have redirect to property. This should be employees, and then we need to define a path match, so this should be a full. Alright, so when we enter a empty path in browser like localhost 4200, it should redirect to employees path, and employees path has a component like employee list component, and this is the path match strategy. So it is recommended to use path match full strategy when we configure a empty path. Alright, so this is a pretty simple routes we have defined in a routes array, and this routes array we pass to for root method of router module, and this router module we get from Angular/router package. It's pretty simple, right? You understood the flow, right? So first we configure base tag with href equals to / in index.html, and then we create app routing module, and inside app routing module we provide we import router module from Angular/router package, and this module has for root method, and we pass routes to this for root method, and then we import app routing module inside our root module, that is app module here. So this is third step, and we configure routes in our routes array in app routing module. So this is the fourth step, and fifth step is we need to configure a router outlet directive. So go to the app component.html template, and here we have provided app employee list selector as a custom HTML element. So let's replace this with the directive called router outlet. So router outlet is Angular provided directive. Okay, so we need to use this directive in order to update our templates to dynamically load a component based on the URL path. Let's save all the files. Let's go back to the browser and let's verify how our routing works. So if you type the URL localhost 4200, it should redirect to the employees path. So look at here, when I enter localhost 4200, it is redirecting to /employees. So this is what we have provided route here. So when we type empty path, then it should redirect to the employees, and the corresponding component, that is employees component, will get rendered. Okay, great. And when we use the URL path localhost 4200 /employees, this should render employee list component. Alright guys, we have successfully configured routing in our Angular application. Now let's go ahead and let's see how the navigation we can configure. Currently our application supports 2 routes, right? However, only way to use these routes is for the users to manually type the URL path in the browser's address bar. But sometimes we want to click on some link or button, then we should navigate to the corresponding component. This is called the navigation, and let's see how to configure navigation in our Angular application. So open app component template, and now what we'll do, we'll implement header and footer for our application, and also we'll provide a navigation links in header section. Okay, for that let's go ahead and let's first write the code for the header. This is the navigation tag, and here we're going to add some Bootstrap CSS classes. Okay, and inside this navigation bar we'll configure the URLs and provide a Bootstrap CSS class like this. So this is the unordered list, so let's also define a list here, and let's go ahead and let's provide a Bootstrap CSS class that is now -item, and let's go ahead and let's configure hyperlink here, and Bootstrap CSS class like now link, and then let's say the employee list. So once we click on this hyperlink, that is employee list, we should be able to navigate to the employee list page. Now let's use an Angular directive, that is router link, to provide a navigation path, URL path here. For example, a router link. So router link is a Angular provided directive, and here we provide a URL path. So this is the employees, so that we have configured in app routing module here. Alright, so this is the Angular directive that will basically connects the routes to specified template files. Okay, now we want to identify the active route, right? So for that we can use Angular directive called router link active. So we can use this directive to identify the active route, and this active is basically provided by Bootstrap, so we can use active class here. So this is a simple header, and here I have just added a single link. So going forward we'll add few more links to our header section. Now let's go ahead and let's add a footer section to our Angular application. Let's write a code here. Just use footer HTML element and the CSS class, let's say footer. So this is the custom CSS class that will add a style to this CSS class bit later. And inside footer we're gonna add a div here, and let's add a Bootstrap CSS class that is container, and inside a div let's specify spam, and inside spam let's write the text like all writes result 2020 at Java Guides. It's pretty simple footer. Let's open styles.css file, and inside this file let's create a footer CSS class with some CSS properties like position absolute, width 100%, height 70 pixel, background color blue, text align center, color white. Okay, let's save all the files and let's go back to the browser and let's see how it looks. Yeah, here we go. So look at here, our Angular application looks good now. So let me recap what we have done in this video. We have configured routing for our Angular application. For example, if we enter a URL localhost 4200, it should redirect to /employees URL, and we have added header with some navigation links, and we have also added footer to our Angular application. Let's create add employee REST API, open employee controller, and here just let me write the comment, create employee REST API. Alright, just create a method first, public and employee. So this REST API returns a employee object as a JSON. So let's keep employee as a return type, and the name of the method is create employee, and just pass employee object as a method argument. Okay, and this method returns employee object, right? So let's call employee repository dot save method. So save method return a employee object. So let's pass employee object as a method argument to the save method. Now we have created a method. Okay, let's use annotations to make this method as a REST endpoint. Let's use @post mapping annotation. So this method will handle HTTP post request, hence we are going to use @post mapping annotation, and let's configure URL over here /employees, and post request contains a JSON request body, right? And JSON request body we are going to directly map to the employee object. So let's use @ for that. Let's use @request body annotation. That's it, guys. Very simple REST API. Now what we'll do, we'll start the Tomcat server. That is, we'll just run our Spring Boot project and we'll test create employee REST API using Postman REST client. Now look at here, our Spring Boot application is up and running on embedded Tomcat server on port 08080. Now let's go back to the Postman REST client and let us test the API. So look at here, the HTTP method is post, and this is the REST endpoint URL localhost 8080/API/v1/employees, and in a header just type content type as application/JSON, and in the body select a raw and give a JSON request body like this. First name Tom, last name Cruz, email ID tom@gmail.com. Hit send button. So look at here, we got a successful response with HTTP status 200. Okay. Alright guys, we have successfully stored a record into a database. Let's go ahead and let's verify. Open MySQL Workbench and just execute select query on employees table. So look at here, a new record is successfully inserted into a database. Alright, now what we'll do, we'll add one more record. Let's give post name as Amir and last name as Khan, and email as amir@gmail.com, and hit send button. So look at here, we got a response, and let's verify a record in a database table. Here we go. So look at here, record is added to the database. It's pretty simple. Alright, great. We have successfully created add employee REST API. So we are going to create employee component, and we are going to create employee form through which we can add a employee. Alright, before that, let's quickly look into the two-way binding. Alright, consider we have a form with first name, last name, email ID, and similarly here we have a component class. It has a property employee. So employee is basically a TypeScript class. It contains the properties first name, last name, and email ID. So when we create the employee property of employee TypeScript class in component, we access its properties in HTML template using employee.firstname, employee.lastname, employee.email like this. Whenever I enter something in first name, last name, and email ID input controls, then the corresponding properties will get automatically updated in component class. And whenever I do some changes in model properties in component class, then the corresponding properties will get updated in HTML template. So this is how the two-way works in Angular. So look at here we have data binding and event binding. So whenever we define properties in component class and we bind that properties in component template, then it is called property binding or data binding. So we basically use Angular interpolation to bind properties in HTML template, and when we perform some events on HTML template, it should be bind in component class using methods or functions. So Angular provides a nice feature, that is two-way binding, and Angular also provides ng model directive. So we can use ng model directive to achieve two-way binding in our Angular application. Let's head over to VS Code ID and let's quickly create a component. So make sure that you are in a project, root folder of project, Angular-frontend, and just type the Angular CLI command, ng, g for generate, C for component, and just followed by the name of the component. Let's say create employee, hit enter. When this command completes, it created 4 files and app module is also updated. Well, if you expand app folder, within app folder you can see here create employee folder is created, and within a create employee folder 4 files are generated. And if you open app module, Angular CLI has automatically added create employee component to declarations array. Alright, now let's go ahead and let's configure route for our newly created component, that is create employee component. Let's go ahead and let's open app routing module, and here we're going to configure a route. So let's go ahead and let's create a JavaScript object within a routes array. Let's specify path, and then let's say create employee as our path, followed by components property. So once we enter a path like create-employee, then corresponding component will get rendered. So the component name is create employee component. It's pretty simple, right? So once we configure route, now we can able to provide links in a header section of our Angular application. Let's open app component template, and here we are going to configure a link for add employee page. So let's go ahead and let's copy this list and paste it here, and let's change the link name accordingly. So this is going to be our create employee, or let's say add employee link, and here we are going to change a router link create employee. So this is the path that we have configured in a route here. Okay, let's save the file and let's go back to the browser, and here you can able to see add employee link is added in a header section. If you click on add employee, you should be able to navigate to create employee path. Alright, so our routing is perfectly working. If you click on employee list, it should navigate to the employees list page, and if you click on add employee, it should navigate to create employee page. Let me summarize what we have done in this video. We had a quick look on two-way binding in Angular. So basically we are going to use ng model directive to achieve two-way binding in our Angular application, and we have created create employee component, and we have added a route to create employee component, and we have also added add employee link in a header section, so that once we click on add employee, it should navigate to create employee page. In next video, we'll create a form, that is create employee form, through which we can add a new employee to the employees list. Now let's open create employee component, and let's define a property, that is employee of type employee class, and we are going to create object of employee class, and initially all the properties of employee class should be empty. Alright, let's head over to create employee component template, and let's design a form here. Let me replace the default code and let me write the title of the page using h3 tag here, and let's say create employee, and after that let's go ahead and let's create a form. And inside the form here we are going to use ng submit event to listen form submission event. Well, look at the syntax here. Within a parenthesis we have ng submit, and let's assign an event handler to this ng submit event. Let's say on submit. Alright, so this is the ng submit event which is enclosed in parenthesis, and we have assigned a event handler to this event, and this event handler will define in component class. Let's open create employee component, and here we're gonna define an unsubmit function like this. Let's go back to create employee component, and let's use a Bootstrap CSS classes to design our create employee form. Let's create a div with class and then add Bootstrap CSS class, that is form -group. After that create a label, and let's give name to the label like first name, and after that create a input field, input type as text, and then add Bootstrap CSS class form -control, and then id equals to first name, and then we're gonna use ng model directive for two-way binding. So look at the syntax here, ng model, and includes ng mod directive in parenthesis, and after that enclose this in square brackets. Okay, so this is the syntax to use ng directive in input element, and let's assign a property to this directive. Let's say employee dot first name. So this is the employee we have defined in a component, and employee property is of type employee, and this is the first name, last name, email id. So these are the properties of employee class that we are using in the form. Alright, next give a name to the input element like first name. It's pretty simple, right? So the important point here is ng model. So this is the directive that we are using for two-way binding. So as soon as we enter something in this input text, the corresponding property will get updated, and as soon as we update this property in component class, then this input text box will get updated. Well, let's go ahead and let's add this input text box to the last name and email id as well. Let me copy this div and paste it here, and let me change the necessary stuff. This is the last name, and id should be last name. Just copy this, and name should be last name, and property employee dot last name. Well, let me again copy this, and let's define for email id. Let me change the label. This should be email id, and let's go ahead and let's change the id here. This should be an email id, and name email id, and property employee dot email id, and just save the file, and let's add a button here. So when we enter something in these input text fields, then we need to submit the form, right? For that we are going to create a button over here, and then let's add a Bootstrap CSS class like button success, and the type of the button is submit, and let's give name to the button as submit. Let's save all the files and let's head over to the browser and let's see whether it is working or not. So look at here, we got an error. It says like can't bind to ng model directive since it is not a known property of input. Well, ng model directive is present in a separate package, in a separate module, that is forms module. So in order to use ng model directive, we have to import forms module in our app module. Alright, let's head over to the VS Code ID again and go to the app module, and here we're going to import forms module from Angular forms, and just copy the name of the module, and here after HTTP client module just paste it here. Let's save the file and let's head over to the browser. So look at here, the error is resolved. So remember, whenever you want to use ng model directive, you have to import forms module in app module. Okay, great. So look at here, the form is scattered. So let's go ahead and let's align this form properly. Go to the create employee component template and let's go ahead and let's add a div here, div, and add a Bootstrap CSS class like column, mid, and let's say 8, and let's add offset Bootstrap CSS class like offset mid, and then define 3, and let's close this div at the end. Save the file and let's go back to the browser and look at here, we have successfully aligned our form at the center, not properly at the center. So let's go ahead and let's change the CSS class again. Let's change from column 8 to 6 and let's save the file and let's go back to the browser. Yeah, now the form aligned at the center. Alright, great. Now go to the create employee component, and here what we'll do, we'll just put some logs here, and just we're going to print the employee object to the console. Let's use this keyword to access the properties. Let's save the file and let's go back to the browser. And now what we'll do, we'll enter form data and we submit the form data, and we'll be able to see the form data will be available in onSubmit method. So let's enter first name Ramesh, last name Further, email ID ramesh@gmail.com, and let me go to the DevTools of Chrome browser. Go to the console here and just clear the console, and then hit submit button, and let's see. Yeah, here we go. The employee object is successfully printed on a console with proper data. First name Ramesh, last name Further, email ID ramesh@gmail.com. Alright guys, great. Now the form data is available in onSubmit method. In next video we'll make a REST API call to send this form data to the server, and at the server REST API will process this data and it will store in a MySQL database. In previous video we have created create employee form, and once we submit this form we are able to get a form data inside onSubmit method. So here we have create employee component, right, and we have defined onSubmit method inside create employee component. So once we submit the data, the form data will be available inside this method. So look at here, we just provided console log and we have printed employee object to the console. In this video we'll make a REST API call and we'll send the form data to the REST API, and REST API internally will process this request, and it will save the employee form data in a MySQL database. So first we need to create a method inside employee service. So here we're going to create a method which will make a REST API call and will send a data form data through REST API, and REST API internally store data into a MySQL database. Alright guys, let's go ahead and let's create a method. Let's say create employee, and let's pass a employee object as an argument to create employee method, and this is the type of employee TypeScript class, followed by colon, followed by observable, and here we're gonna pass object as a type, or you can pass any. So if you don't know the response of the REST API, you can just pass object or any type, okay, like this. Alright, let me provide object here and return this dot, then HTTP client, and then we are going to send a HTTP post request, right? For that we are going to call a post method here, and then backstick, let's use dollar and then curly braces and just call base URL, okay, and comma, and just pass employee object. That's it. It's pretty simple, right? So this is the post request, so we have to send the data in a body of the post method like this. Now we'll head over to the component and we'll make this method call over there. So basically we inject employee service in a create employee component and we'll call employee service method. Alright, great. Let's head over to create employee component and let's inject using constructor, let's say employee service, and this is employee service, and make sure that employee service is imported at the top. Okay, great. Now what we'll do, we'll create a save employee method here, and inside save employee method let's call this dot employee service and then call its method, that is create employee, and let's pass the employee object as a method argument to this method, and this method returns observable, so we can subscribe to this method so that we can process a synchronous response here, and it has the data as a response object and arrow syntax, and we can able to print the error response like this, and here I'm gonna just print the success response to the console data. So once we submit the employee form successfully, then we should be able to navigate to the employees list page, right? For that we are going to use a router here, so I'm going to create a separate method. Let's say go to employee list, and here let's use a router to navigate to the employee list page. Let's first inject a router from Angular router package. Go to the constructor, and here let's inject a router, and make sure that router should be imported from Angular/router package. Okay, now we can use this router to navigate to the corresponding path. So here I'm going to use a router, this dot router dot navigate, and then we pass the path of the route that we want to navigate. So router provides a navigate method, and through navigate method we can pass a path to which we are going to navigate. Now we call this save employee method from onSubmit. Let's go ahead and let's call this dot save employee method from onSubmit method, and let's go ahead and let's add employee information and submit the form. Let's say I'm going to add an employee like let's say Ram, and Pawar, and email ID as ram@gmail.com. hit submit. I guess we got some error. Let me see what is the error. Inspect and go to the console. We got a success response, but we are not able to navigate to the employee list page. Okay, so let me head over to the VS Code ID and let me see what is missing. Yeah, here we go. So basically we need to call this method from here, this dot, let's call go to employee list method and save the file, and let's see how it works now. Let me go to the employees list and let me add one more employee now. Let's say Prabhas, and then let's say Jadhav, email ID as prabhas@gmail.com. hit submit. So look at here, Prabhas employee is added to the employee list. It means that we have successfully made a REST API call and we have successfully stored a employee form data into MySQL database, and we were successfully able to navigate to the employee list page. Alright, great. So let me update this title. Let me head over to the VS Code ID again and go to the app component.ts file, and here this is the name of the Angular project. So let me update this to, let's say, Angular 10 Spring Boot crude full stack app, something like this. And let's save the file and let's head over to the browser, and we can able to see the title is updated, Angular 10 Spring Boot crude full stack app. Now our application looks good. So let me summarize what we have done in this video. We have created create employee method, which in turn make a REST API call, and we have pass the employee form data to the REST API, and we inject employee service in create employee component, and we use its method, that is create employee method, and we pass employee form object to the create employee method, and we process the response, and we also just printed error object if there are any exception in processing this request. So after a success response of the REST API, we navigate to the list employee page using a router here. Okay, it's pretty simple. Alright guys, we completed create employee functionality end to end. In next video we'll create few REST APIs, and then we'll create update employee component to perform update employee functionality. Get employee by ID REST API. Get employee by ID REST API. Okay, just type a method public, and this method returns the employee object to the client. So let's give return type as employee, and let's give method name as get employee by ID. Alright, and we are going to pass ID as a method argument, right, long ID. Let's annotate this method with @get mapping annotation. Let's configure the REST endpoint URL over here, employees/id. Okay, so this is a path variable. Now we want to map, or we want to store this ID value into the Java variable. So for that we are going to use @path variable annotation to map this ID with this variable. So let's use @path variable annotation. Now let's retrieve a employee object from the database. For that we are going to use the employee repository. Let's create an employee object here, and let's use the employee repository, and we're gonna call find by ID, right, find by ID method, and just pass ID to the find by method. So look at here, find by ID returns optional as a return type. So here what we'll do, we'll use dot or else throw method. So if record not exist in database, then we are going to throw resource not found exception. For that, let's use or else throw method over here, and basically we need to pass a lambda expression to this method, because this method internally uses functional interfaces. Okay, and we use lambda expression to implement a functional interface. Let's use lambda expression syntax here and just pass object of the custom exception, that is resource not found exception. A resource not found exception, and just pass the custom message over here, employee not exist with ID, and just pass the ID over here. Let me break this statement. Okay, great. So what we have done, we have called find by ID method. So this method basically returns optional object as a return type, and optional provides or else throw method. So if record not exists in database, then we just simply throw resource not found exception like this. Now let's return a employee object to the client. So what we'll do, we need to also return HTTP status, right? For that we need to use a response entity class. Let's use return type as response entity, and this is the generic class. So let's pass employee as a generic type, and here let's return response entity, and we are going to return a OK status, that is 200 status. So let's choose OK and just pass employee object in a body. That's it. It's pretty simple, right? Alright guys, this is pretty simple REST API, that is get employee by ID REST API. Now let's go ahead and let's test this REST API. For that, what we will do, I will start the application, go to the Spring Boot application main class, right click, run as Spring Boot app. Now look at here, Spring Boot application is up and running on embedded Tomcat server on port 080. Now let's go back to the Postman REST client and let us test this REST API. Open a new tab and just type localhost 8080/API/v1/employees, and here we are going to retrieve a particular employee. So let's go back to the database. So I am going to get an employee Ramesh with ID 1. So let's pass ID 1 as a path variable /1 and choose HTTP GET method over here and simply hit send button. So this will retrieve a employee object with ID 1. If you want to retrieve employee with ID 2, just pass ID 2 over here and just hit send button. So this will retrieve a employee with ID 2. Alright guys, we have successfully created get employee by ID REST API, and we have tested using Postman REST client. Now let's create update employee REST API. Go to the employee controller. Within employee controller, let me just write the comment here, update employee REST API. Okay, so just follow the steps, public and response entity, and just pass type as employee, and let's give a method name as update employee. Okay, make this E as caps, and we are going to pass ID as a method argument, along with that the object of the employee class. So basically client sends updated employee object in a request body, For that we are going to use employee object here. Now what we'll do, we'll use annotations over here. So let's use put mapping annotation for update operation. So this method will basically handles a put request. For that we are going to use @put mapping annotation. Let's configure REST endpoint URL over here, /employees/ just pass a path variable here, that is ID. Now let's map this path variable with a Java variable by using @path variable annotation. And also we are going to directly map a request JSON object into a Java object. For that we are going to use @request body annotation. Pretty simple, right? Great. So to update an employee, first we need to retrieve an existing employee from the database. For that what we will do, we will reuse this code. Just copy this code. So this will basically retrieve employee by ID. If employee is not existing in database, then it simply throws resource not found exception. So look at here, this is the duplicate local variable employee. Here just pass this as let's rename this object as employee details. Now what we'll do, we'll update this retrieved employee object with a request employee object. Okay, just change the first name, employee details dot get first name. Similarly, let's also change last name, employee details dot get last name, employee dot set email ID, and let's get an email ID from the employee details object and set to the employee object. Now once we set all the information that we want to update to the employee object, we simply save this employee object to the database. Let's go ahead and let's save this updated employee object to the database. Let's use save method and just pass the employee object as a method argument, and here we store the updated employee object in a separate employee variable, and we simply return this object to the client. For that, just use return response entity dot OK. So this is 200 status, and in a body just type updated employee. Alright guys, that is pretty much. So what we have done, we have retrieved an employee from the database, and we have added all the updated information to the employee object, and we have stored that employee object into a database, and we have just returned updated employee object to the client. Pretty simple REST API. Now let's run the Spring Boot project and let's test this REST API using Postman REST client. Alright guys, Spring Boot application is running on Tomcat server on port 8080. Let's go back to the Postman REST client, go to the new tab and just type localhost 8080/API/v1/employees, and this is the update REST API. So select put HTTP method and go to the header, and we are sending JSON as request body, right? So for that, let's use content type as application/JSON, and I can go back to the body. In a body where you're sending a JSON, right? So let me copy the JSON object from the post request and let me paste in a body. And what we'll do is simply update an employee, that is a Ramesh employee. Let me show you that. Go back to the MySQL workbench. So look at here, this is the table. It has 4 records. We are going to update the employee with ID 1. Okay, that is a Ramesh employee. So let's pass id here to the URL as a path variable, and I'm going to update the first name from Ramesh to Ram, and last name from Patare to something like Jadhav, and email id from ramesh@gmail.com to ram@gmail.com. So look at here, first name is Ramesh, last name Patare, email id ramesh@gmail.com, right? So I'm going to update these details with these details. Okay, so once you configure all the details, hit send button. Yeah, here we go. So look at here the response. We got a updated record in a response, and we have successfully updated first name, last name, and email address. Let's verify in a table. So let's query the select statement here. So look at here, a record, first record is get successfully updated. Alright guys, we have successfully created updated REST API, and we have also tested it using Postman REST client. Well, in this video we create update employee component, and we will configure route for update employee component, and we create an update button correspond to each employee. Once we click on update button, it should navigate to the update employee page. Let's head over to the Visual Studio Code IDE and let's create update employee component. Go to the integrated terminal. Make sure that you are in a root folder of our Angular application, that is Angular-frontend, and let's go ahead and let's type the command ng g for generate, c for component, and then followed by name of the component, that is update-employee. Hit enter. Once the command completes, it created 4 files and updated app module, right? So if you go to the app folder, within app folder, update employee folder is created, and within the update employee 4 files are generated. Alright, and Angular CLI will automatically add a newly created component to app module, so we no need to explicitly add a newly created component to app module. Okay, now once we created update employee component, let's go ahead and let's configure a route for update employee component. Open app routing module and go to the routes array. Within the routes array, create an object, and we have path property, and let's give a path as update employee, and then /:id. So we are going to update a particular employee, right? So this ID represents the particular employee ID. Okay, and we basically pass this ID to the REST API to get a particular employee from the REST API. Well, after that we have a component property, and here we specify the particular component name, that is update employee component. So whenever we hit this URL in browser, the corresponding component will get rendered. So this is a very simple routing for update employee component. Now let's go ahead and let's add update button. So we'll add update button corresponding to each employee, so that whenever we click on update button, we'll able to navigate to the update employee page. Let's open the employee list component template, and here we have a table, right? And let's create actions column first. Actions, under actions column we have a table, right? We have a button. Let's create a button over here. So inside a button we handle a click event. So this is the syntax of Angular to bind a click event to the button, and then here we specify event handler. In our case we have update employee event handler, and then within a parenthesis we provide ID, we pass the ID. Alright, pretty simple. Followed by let's add a Bootstrap CSS class like button info, and then give a name to the button like update, Now we'll define this event handler in employee list component here. So once we click on button, it should navigate to the update employee page, right? So let's go ahead and let's define this event handler here, and we are going to use a router to route this request to the update employee page. For that, let's go ahead and let's inject a router here, private router, and make sure that a router is imported from the package angular/router. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's use this router here, this dot router dot navigate, and update employee event handler should have ID, right? So look at here, this ID we have passed it in a button. This is the ID, right? Okay, so to the navigate method we're going to pass an array of elements. So first is the path of the route, that is update employee, followed by ID. So update hyphen employee, so this is the route that we have defined in app routing component right here. So this is the syntax to call update employee page using a router. It's pretty simple. Now let's go ahead and let's test this from the browser. So look at here, update button is appear correspond to each employee, and once we click on update button, it is navigating to update employee page. And look at here the route, this is the route we have configured, right? So update hyphen employee slash 29 is ID of particular employee, and this is the update employee page. Now let's go back to the VS Code ID and let's design update employee page. In previous one of the video we have created create employee form, right? And I have explained you step by step how to design a create employee form and update employee form, which looks similar to a create employee form. So let me just copy the whole content of create employee component.html page, and let's open update employee component.html, and here I'm going to just paste it, and let's go and let's change accordingly. So let's change a page title from create employee to update employee. Well, you can use a single component to perform create and update functionality, but to keep it simple, I am going to use separate update employee component to perform update employee functionality. Well, so this is the input field to handle first name, and this is the input field to handle last name, and this is the input field to handle employee email ID, and this is the button. Let's save the file and let's go back to the browser and let's see how this page looks like. Yeah, here we go, update employee page. Once I click on update button, it should navigate to the update employee page, and this is how the update employee page looks like. Well, create employee and update employee page both looks same, and yeah, so you can use the same component to perform both the operations, but to keep it simple, I have created a separate update employee component to perform update employee functionality. Well, in case of update, we need to populate a particular employee data in the form so that user can able to update the employee, right? So basically we make a get employee by ID REST API call, and we pass this ID to the REST API. REST API basically fetch the particular employee by ID from the database, and it will send that employee data in a response, and we populate that response employee data in the update employee page. Well, in next video we will make a get employee by ID REST API call, and we'll fetch a particular employee by ID, and then we populate that employee in the update employee page so that user can able to update that particular employee. In previous video we have created update employee component and we have configured a route for update employee component, and we have added update button correspond to each employee in employee list page. And once we click on update button, it should navigate to the update employee page. And we have also designed update employee form. In this video we'll make a get employee by ID REST API, and we populate that particular employee in the update employee form so that user can able to update the employee. Alright, let's go ahead and let's write the code to make a REST API call, and we populate the response of the REST API in the update employee page. Let's head over to the VS Code ID. Let's open employee service, and here we're gonna write a REST client code which will make a get employee by ID REST API call. Let's give a method name as get employee by ID, something like this, and then we need to pass ID to this method, and this is the type of number, followed by observable, and then we know that this REST API returns a employee object. So let's go ahead and let's pass a employee model as a type to the observable class like employee, and then just simply return this dot HTTP client, and then call a get method. So we are making a get HTTP request, right? And then we know that this REST API returns the employee object, so let's go ahead and let's pass employee model as a type, followed by let's pass parameters to get method. Notice here we are using backstick. Within a backstick we use dollar, within a curly braces we're going to use this dot base URL, followed by slash dollar, and within a curly braces just pass the ID. That's it. It's pretty simple, right? Now you're gonna call this method from the update employee component. Well, let's go ahead and let's first inject employee service in update employee component. Open update employee component and go to the constructor. Just inject employee service over here. And make sure that employee service is imported at the top. And let's go ahead and let's create an employee property. Employee equals to new employee, and here we're gonna make a method call here, employee service, and then get employee by ID. So look at here, this is important. So get employee by ID method expects ID, right? And we need to retrieve ID from the route. So let me show you how to do it. We'll use activated route module to retrieve ID from the route. For example, in a browser you can just search for activated route in Angular and go to the activated route API. So basically activated route provides access to information about a route associated with a component that is loaded in an outlet, and this activated route provides a couple of methods like a couple of properties, snapshot and params. So we use these properties to access ID from particular route. Let's first inject activated route private. Let's call it as a route and then activated route, and make sure that activated route should be imported from Angular/router, and we're going to use a route here. So first I will create a property here, ID should be a type of number, and then here I'm going to assign ID from route to ID property here. Let's use this dot route, and then we have snapshot, and then we have params, pass a key here to get id value. That's it. So this is how we get id from particular route using this syntax. So we use activated route, it has snapshot and params properties, and we use these properties to access id from the route. Well, now we can able to get id and we can pass this id here. Alright, and just subscribe to this method, so it returns observable, so we can subscribe to it. And then handle the response data here, data arrow syntax, and then just assign data to the employee property here. This dot employee equals to data, and here we can also handle error response. We just print the error response here like this. Okay, great. And this employee property we have used in update employee page here, employee.first name, employee.last name, and employee.email id. Well, as soon as this employee property is populated with data, that data will be reflected in the form. Now let's save all the files and let's go back to the browser and let's see how it works. Yeah, here we go. The browser automatically refresh and it internally made a get employee by id REST API, and it will populate employee data in the update employee page. It means that we have successfully made a get employee by id REST API and we have populated the response of get employee by id REST API in update employee page. So let's go back to the employee list page, and if I click on update button of particular employee, let's say Ramesh employee, here we go. The particular employee data is updated successfully on update employee page. Now user can able to update first name, last name, and email id, and once user hit on submit button, we again make a REST API call, that is update employee REST API call. We submit this updated employee form data to the REST API. REST API internally store this data into MySQL database. So in next video we will make update employee REST API call, and we will send this updated employee form data to the REST API, and REST API will internally store this data into MySQL database. Alright guys. In previous video we have made get employee by id REST API and we have populated a particular employee data in update employee page. In this video we will make update employee REST API call, and we will send update employee form data to the update employee REST API, and update employee REST API internally store this update employee data into MySQL database. Let's go ahead and let's write a REST client code to make update employee REST API. Let's head over to VS Code IDE and let's open employee service, and here we are going to create a method. Let's say update employee, and this method takes two parameters. One is id of the particular employee, and second argument as employee updated data, and this is the type of employee TypeScript class, followed by colon and then observable, and here we can pass object as a type, and then we simply return this dot HTTP client, and then this is a put HTTP request, so let's call put method and use backstick and dollar within a curly braces. Let's call base URL and then slash and then dollar, and let's access id using dollar curly braces like this, and let's pass second argument as employee object. That's it guys, pretty simple. Now we're gonna call this update employee method in update employee component. Let's head over to the update employee component here, and we have update employee form, right? And once we submit the update employee form, it will call on submit event handler. So let's first define this on submit event handler in update employee component here. Within a on submit method, we're gonna call user service, and then we call update employee method of user service object, and update employee method expect two arguments, one is id and another is employee object. So let's go ahead and let's pass id here. So id, how can we get id? And we can get id like this dot id comma this dot employee. So this id we already got from the route using this syntax, and this is the employee object, right? And this employee object will automatically populated by Angular using ng model directive. And we're gonna subscribe to this method because this method returns observable, so we can subscribe and we can handle the synchronous response, and followed by handle a response inside subscribe method like this arrow syntax. So once employee updated successfully and we got a success response from the REST API, then we will navigate to the employee list page, right? So for that we need to write a route here so that we should navigate to the employee list page. So go to the create employee component, and here we have already written a code. Let me just reuse this code. Just copy and go to the again update employee component, paste it here. And first we need to inject a router here inside a constructor. It's private router, and then it's a router. So make sure that router is imported at the top. Alright, and we use navigate method of router, and then we pass a path of particular route which it navigate. Okay, for example, this is the path we have configured in app routing module. This is, and it will render a corresponding component, that is employee list component. Now let's go ahead and let's call this method here, this dot go to employee list, and here we can handle the error response, like we can print the error response to the console. Alright, pretty simple, right? So we just call update employee method of employee service class, and then we pass id and updated employee object to the update employee method, and this is a synchronous call, so it returns observable, so we subscribe to it and we can handle the response asynchronously. And once we got success response from the REST API, we can call go to employee list method. It internally it will route to the employee list page. Well, let's save all the files and let's go back to the browser and let's see how it works. Well, go to the employee list page. Let's go ahead and let's update one of the employee. I'm going to update admin employee. Click on update button and let's update first name from admin to administrator, and email ID from admin to administrator, and hit submit button. Yeah, here we go. The employee is successfully updated. The first name and email ID is successfully updated, right? Alright guys, we have successfully made update employee REST API call, and we have sent updated employee from data to the update employee REST API, and update employee REST API internally store this data into a MySQL database. Alright guys, we have successfully implemented update employee functionality. Let's develop delete employee REST API. Go to the employee controller. Within the employee controller, we are going to develop delete employee REST API. Delete employee REST API. Alright, just follow the steps. Just create a method first, public. So we are going to return a deleted employee with status message, right? For that, just return a map as a response. Just give key as string and value as boolean, and let's give method name as delete employee, and let's pass id as method argument, long id, and let's use @delete mapping annotation. So this method will handle or delete HTTP request. For that we are going to use @delete mapping annotation, and let's go ahead and let's configure the REST endpoint URL employees slash id as a path variable. And now we are going to map this id with the Java variable, right? That is a long type. For that we are going to use @path variable annotation. It's pretty simple. So in order to delete the employee, first we need to get a existing employee with id, right? So let me reuse this code. So first we'll retrieve a employee with the id. If employee with this particular id is not exist in database, then we simply throw the resource not found exception. It's pretty simple. Again, we just simply pass a employee object to the delete method. So here we're going to use the employee repository, and we're going to call a delete method, and we pass a employee object to the delete method. So this will delete a particular employee, and look at here the return type of delete method, it is a void. Okay, now what we'll do, we'll simply create a map object to simply return like a message deleted as a true, key as a string, and value as boolean. So we need to notify to the client something like the record is deleted successfully, right? For that we are going to just return deleted as true or false. Okay, just give reference as response, and this is a cosa hash map, and response dot put. So let's put an entry here. So we're gonna say key as deleted, response as the value as true. Okay, and return response entity dot okay, and just in a body just pass a response. So again we have to specify response entity as a return type here. Alright, that is pretty much what we have done. Let me stop the server. We have retrieved a employee with id, particular id from the database. If record is not exist, then we simply throw the resource not found exception, and we have called a delete method of employee repository, and we pass employee object to the delete method. This will delete a employee, and delete method does not return anything. So we simply create a map with a entry as deleted true, and we simply return that map to the client. It's pretty simple REST API. Now let's start our Spring Boot project, and let us test delete employee REST API using Postman REST client. Alright guys, our application is up and running on embedded Tomcat server on port 8080. Now we'll delete a particular employee. Let me show you here in our MySQL workbench. So look at here, we have 4 records in a table. So we are going to delete a record 1, the record with id 1. Okay, we are going to delete this particular record. Go back to the Postman REST client and go to the new tab here, and just type localhost /8080/API/v1/employees, and we are going to call a delete REST API. For that we are going to choose a delete HTTP method here, and we are going to delete a record with id 1. So let's pass 1 here as a path variable and hit send button. So look at here, the status 200, and the record is successfully deleted, and we got a deleted true as a response. Let's verify it in a database. So let me quickly run this query, select query, and look at here, a particular record is successfully deleted from the table. Let's delete one more record. So we are going to delete a record with id 2. So let's go back to the Postman REST client and just pass 2 here, hit send button. Yeah, here we go. We got a success response. Let's verify. Let's execute select statement. Here we go. The record is deleted successfully. Alright, that is pretty much about delete employee REST API. We have successfully developed delete employee REST API, and we have tested it using Postman REST client. In previous video, we have created delete employee REST API. In this video, we are going to implement a delete employee functionality in Angular application, and basically we consume delete employee REST API in our Angular application. So in an employee list page, we add a delete button in actions column. Once we click on delete button, it will make a REST API call to delete a particular employee from the database. Well, let's go ahead and let's first add a delete button to employees list page here inside actions column, and then once we click on delete button, it should make a delete employee REST API call. Let's head over to the Visual Studio Code ID and go to the employee list component.html, and here we're going to add a button. So we have already added a button, that is update button. Similar to that, let's add a button, that is delete button, and let's bind a click event to this button. And here we have an event handler name, that is delete employee, and within the parentheses we need to pass ID, that is employee ID, and then add some Bootstrap CSS classes like button, and then button hyphen danger. Give name to the button like delete. Here remove this hyphen, so this class is different and button hyphen danger class is different, and also add some inline style here, that is margin left 10, and let's save the file and let's go back to the browser. So look at here, now it looking good, right? So look at here, the footer height is quite high, so let me reduce the height of the footer. So go to the styles.css, and this is the height is 70 pixel. Let's go and let's give 40. Alright, and let's save the file and let's go back to the browser. Yeah, here we go. The height of the footer is reduced now and it looks good, right? Now once we click on delete button, it should make a REST API call, right? For that, let's go and let's write a REST client code to make a REST API call. So this delete event handler we're gonna define in a employee list component here, and it expects ID of type number. Well, so first we're gonna make a REST API call. For that, we are going to write a REST client code. So inside a employee service, we write the REST client code right here. So first write a REST client code which make a delete employee REST API. So let's go ahead and let's create a method like delete employee, and then pass ID to this method like ID colon number followed by colon and then observable, and you can pass object as a type, and then simply return this dot HTTP client followed by call delete method. So we are making a delete HTTP request, so let's call delete and backstick dollar within a curly braces, just call the base URL and followed by slash dollar, and within a curly braces just pass the ID. It's pretty simple, right? And save the file, and let's use this delete employee method inside employee list component. So this is the delete event method, event handler, right? So this we have already bind in a button in employee list component here. So once we click on this button, delete button, it will call delete employee event handler, and this delete employee event handler we have defined in employee list component. Inside a delete employee event handler, we're gonna use this dot employee service, and we call a delete employee method, and just we pass the ID, and then we subscribe to this method as it returns observable, and we can handle responses synchronously and handle the data here, response data like this. So after successful deletion, we're gonna navigate to the list, employee list page, right? For that I'm going to call get employees method. It's pretty simple. Alright, and this data we can simply log here. Alright, now let's go and let's test our delete employee functionality from the browser. Let's save all the files and let's go back to the browser, and let's go ahead and let's delete one of the employee. Let's say Prabhas. So hit delete button. Yeah, so Prabhas employee is successfully deleted. Let me delete one more employee. Let me delete this Ram employee. Yeah, so Ram employee is also successfully deleted. Let me delete one more employee, John. Yeah, here we go. It means that our delete employee functionality is working as expected. Alright guys, so far we have implemented create employee, list employee, update employee, and delete employee. In next video, we'll implement view employee details functionality. Alright guys, so far we have implemented 4 functionalities: employee list, add employee, update employee, and delete employee. In this video, we're going to implement view employee details functionality. So basically we add view button in actions column. Once we click on view button, it will navigate to the view employee details page. Over there we can able to see a particular employee details. Alright, let's head over to the VS Code IDE and let's quickly create a view employee details component, and let's design a view employee component template to show a particular employee details. Alright, let's head over to the VS Code IDE. Inside the integrated terminal, make sure that you are in a root folder of our application, that is Angular-frontend, and just enter Angular CLI command, ng followed by G for generate, C for component, followed by name of the component, let's say employee details. Hit enter. So this command created 4 files, and it also updated app modules file. Alright, so if you expand app folder, inside app folder you can see employee details folder is created. Within employee details 4 files are generated, and also app module is also updated with newly created component in declarations array. So whenever we create a component using Angular CLI automatically configure a component for that particular module. So in our application we have only one module, that is app module. Alright, now let's go ahead and let's configure a route for employee details component. Go to the app routing module, and here we're going to create a JavaScript object within a routes array, and we configure a route for employee details component. Let's create a JavaScript object with property path, and let's give path as employee details, and we need to get a ID, right? ID of particular employee. So we're going to show a particular employee details, right? For that we're going to need ID of that particular employee, and then we define corresponding component here, that is employee details component. That's it guys, it's very simple. So once we configure route, next we create a view button inside a employee list template. Let's head over to the employee list folder. Within employee list folder, we have employee list component template, and here we have a table, right? Within a table we have actions column, and within actions column we have already defined update and delete button. So along with these buttons, we'll also create one more button, that is view button. Let me copy this existing delete button and paste it here, and let me change it accordingly. Let's give button name as view, and let's change event handler name here. So this is the on-click event handler, and here we're gonna change the event handler name something like employee details. Pretty simple. And once we click on this view button, this event handler will get called, and let's go and let's define this event handler in employee list component. Employee details, and then we need to get ID, right? ID of type number, and then once we click on view button, we should be able to navigate to the view employee details page, right? For that we're going to use a route, and we have already defined a route in one of the previous video for for update operation. Let me just copy the existing line of code, paste it here, and let me change the route name. Route name we have employee details, right? Employee details. It's pretty simple. So this is the route path we have defined in app routing module. This is, and this is the ID, and that ID we passed here. All right, great. Now let's save the file, and let's head over to the browser, and look at here, view button is added. Let me change the Bootstrap CSS class for view button. So instead of danger, let's say info, and save the file. Let's go back to the browser. Yeah, so once we click on view button, we should navigate to the view employee details page. All right, and look at here the URL. So this is the path we have configured in app routing module, right? And this is the ID of that particular employee. Well, now what we will do, we'll design a view employee details page, and we'll make a REST API call, and we pass this ID to the REST API. REST API will return an employee object of this particular ID, and we'll populate that employee object on this page. All right, great. Go to the employee details component, and let's go and let's define a properties inside a component, that is ID of type number, and then define the employee property of type employee TypeScript class. Now inside a component we need to retrieve ID, right? ID of that particular employee. For example, so look at here, this is the URL, and we need to get this ID inside a component. For that we are going to use a route. So in one of the previous video I have shown you how to use activated route to get this ID. So similarly, let's go and let's use activated route to get this ID from the route. Let's inject activated route in this component. Activated route, and using route we can get the ID from the route. ID equals to this dot ID equals to route, and then snapshot, and then params, and here we can pass the ID. So this will give you the ID of that particular route. Okay, so once we got the ID, we can pass this ID to the REST API, and REST API will return our employee object of this particular ID. So within an employee service, we have already created get employee by ID REST method, right, which will internally make get employee by ID REST API. Let's go and let's call this method to get a particular employee by ID. Alright, let's go ahead and let's inject employee service in the employee details component, then a constructor private employee service, and then employee service. Now let's use employee service here. So first we're gonna define the employee object, right? New, and then employee, and here let's use this dot employee service and then call the method get employee by ID, and let's pass the ID here, and this method returns observable. So let's use a subscribe method to subscribe to the observable, and inside this subscribe method we can handle the response. This is basically our synchronous response. Now let's assign a response of the REST API to the employee object. Now once we got a response of REST API and we populate that response in the employee object, let's go to the employee details component template, and here we're going to design view employee details page. Let's say header of the page like view employee details, something like this, and then followed by the div. Now let's create one more div, and let's create a label, and this is the bold element, HTML element, and then let's give label name as first name, and then let's use Angular interpolation to access the property of the component. So this is the employee dot first name. So this is the employee property we have defined in a component, right? Employee details component, and this employee property we are going to access in a component template like this. Okay, now similarly let's go ahead and let's display employee last name and email ID as well. Let me copy and paste twice here, and let me change the label last name, and here let's change the property employee dot last name, and this is email ID, right? Email ID, and this is the email ID. It's pretty simple. Let's save the files and let's go back to the browser and let's see how it works. Yeah, it is working. Let me go to the employee list page. From here, if I want to see a John Cena employee details, then I can click on view button and I can able to see a John Cena employee details here. Alright guys, we have successfully implemented view employee details. Let me quickly add an employee here, ram @gmail.com, hit submit, and let's say I want to view ram employee details, then I can click on view button and I can see all the details of ram employee in a separate page. And if you want to navigate to the employee list, you can click on employee list here. Alright guys, we have successfully implemented view employee details functionality. In this video, let's quickly have end-to-end demo of our Angular Spring Boot CRUD full stack application, and let me recap what are the functionality we have implemented in our employee management application in this series. Well, we have implemented employee list, add employee, update employee, delete employee, and view employee features. Alright, let me clean all the records from the employee list. I will delete all the records and let's have a end-to-end demo. Now let's go ahead and let's add an employee to the employee list. Click on add employee link, and here I'm gonna add employee, that is Ramesh employee, first name Ramesh, last name Fadtare, email ID ramesh@gmail.com, hit submit. Let's go ahead and let's add one more employee. Click on add employee tab, and let's go ahead and let's add one more employee. First name John, last name Sina, and john@gmail.com. Hit submit. Let's go ahead and let's add one more employee. Let's say admin, last name admin, email ID admin@gmail.com. Yeah, here we go. Let's go ahead and let's add one more employee. Let's say Ram, and then Pawar, ram@gmail.com. Hit submit. Great, we have added 4 employees to the employee list. Now let's go ahead and let's update one of the employee. I'm going to update Ramesh employee. Click on update button, and let's change first name from Ramesh to Rama, something like this, and last name from Fadatari to Jadhav. Okay, and email ID from ramesh@gmail.com to rama@gmail.com. Hit submit. So look at here, the Ramesh employee is successfully updated. Earlier the first name was Ramesh, now it is updated to Ram, and similarly last name and email ID also updated, right? Well, add employee and update employee functionalities are working as expected. Now let's see the delete functionality. I'm going to delete this Ram employee. Click on delete button. Yeah, here we go. Ram employee successfully deleted. Let me delete Johnson employee. Click on delete button. Yeah, John employee is also successfully deleted. Now let's go ahead and let's see the view employee details functionality. Let's say I want to view admin employee details. Click on view button. Yeah, here we go. We can able to see all the admin employee details in view employee details page. Well, if you want to navigate to the employee list page, you can click on employee list tab over here. And if you want to see RAM employee details, you can click on view button. You can able to see all the details of this particular employee in view employee details page. Well, these are the 5 functionalities we have implemented in this employee management application. Well, maybe in future I will add some more feature to our Angular Spring Boot Core full stack application. Okay, great. So I have created 25 videos on Angular Spring Boot Core full stack application series, and I have created YouTube playlist for them. So if you go to my YouTube channel and go to the playlist section, here you can able to see Angular Spring Boot Core full stack application playlist. If you click on view full playlist, you can able to see here all the videos of this particular course are listed here. So I highly recommend you guys to go to this playlist, and you can check out all the videos to learn how to develop full stack application using Angular and Spring Boot. Well, I have already created a GitHub repository on my GitHub profile, and I have hosted source code of this Angular Spring Boot Core full stack application on my GitHub repository. So you can go ahead and you can check out my GitHub repository. For example, so look at here, this is a Angular 10 Spring Boot Core full stack app GitHub repository I have created in my GitHub profile account. So whenever you get any issues while implementing Angular Spring Boot Core full stack application, you can go ahead and you can check out my GitHub repository over here. So this is the working code that we have seen throughout this series. This is the working code. So whenever you stuck anywhere while creating this full stack application, you can just check out a source code of this GitHub repository and compare your code with this source code, and you can find the issues. Well, Angular 10 Spring Boot Core full stack app repository has 2 projects, Angular frontend, Spring Boot backend, and this is the readme file. I have provided link of all the videos of this series in readme file. You can also go through each videos whenever you want. You guys can follow me on GitHub. Usually I will host source code of all the tutorials, series, courses on my GitHub profile account. So whenever I will host source code of any tutorials, courses or series, you will get notified. Well, I hope this video tutorial series is useful for you guys. If you like this course, then subscribe to my YouTube channel, and if you have any queries or any questions, let me know in a comment section below so that I will try to clear your doubts. Alright guys, thanks for watching this series, and yeah, I will see you guys in one more new brand series. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I will see you guys in next one.